Thank you guys so much. Today I titled my talk, Personalized Medicine, because I myself am studying and battling the same disease. This is a picture of me as a third-year medical student at the University of Pennsylvania, healthy third-year med student training to become an oncologist so I could treat cancer patients in memory of my mom, who I had lost just a few years before. But over the course of a couple weeks, I went from being this healthy third-year med student to experiencing multiple organ system failure. This is me hospitalized at the same hospital that I'd previously been seeing patients at. My liver, my kidneys, my bone marrow all shut down. I gained 70 pounds of fluid. A retinal hemorrhage made me blind in my left eye. Over the course of 3 months, I was eventually diagnosed with idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, a rare and deadly illness where the immune system becomes activated and then attacks and shuts down your vital organs for an unknown cause. Castleman disease affects about 5,000 patients each year in the United States, and there are 3 subtypes that affect individuals of all ages. My subtype, idiopathic MCD, is the most deadly. A third of us die within 5 years of diagnosis, and another third die within 10 years of diagnosis. Fortunately, with my diagnosis, my doctor started me on cytotoxic chemotherapy, adriamycin, Cytoxan, etoposide, Velcade, Dex, thalidomide, rituximab. Fortunately, that chemotherapy regimen kicked in and saved my life just in time. About 24 hours later, I was read my last rites when the doctors thought I would not survive, but fortunately the chemotherapy did save my life. This is a picture of me with my dad just about a week after the 7-agent chemotherapy was started. The first time in almost 5 months that I was up and well and moving. This is from New Year's Eve of 2010, and my dad and I took a lap walking around the floor that evening, and as we passed by the family waiting area, we noticed that there was a gentleman who was leaning forward in his chair, and he'd been drinking on New Year's Eve. And so on our second lap around the floor, we saw this gentleman had fallen on the floor. So my dad ran over to him and helped him into his chair, and he looked at us and he said, "Thanks so much. Good luck to you and your wife." And my dad and I kind of rounded the corner and we said, "Wife?" And then I looked down at my belly and I realized that this guy thought I was my dad's pregnant wife, which was a low point emotionally for us. But I turned to my dad and I said, "Man, you've got an ugly wife." We laughed really, really hard. But of course, the belly was from all the liver and kidney dysfunction. From this picture, you can certainly see how someone might have confused me as a pregnant woman, but I was finally doing well. And I took a picture every week for the next 8 weeks, and you can see the fluid going away, my hair growing back, and me going from being so sick to looking well. Of course, I took pictures from the side as well, and you can see them here, the fluid going away, my hair growing back. So I returned to medical school after spending almost 6 months hospitalized to get back on track of becoming a clinical oncologist. I wasn't interested in Castleman disease research because I knew folks were doing research all around the world. But I did do a little bit of Castleman's research, and I published a case report on myself because I had noticed that I had these cherry hemangiomas, blood moles appearing all over my skin leading up to each of my relapses. So I published this case report, and so I was the first author and I was the patient. And then they also put a picture of my chest on the cover of their journal, which I think might be a medical first. Unfortunately, 15 months after I got out of the hospital, I had a full-blown relapse. All of my symptoms returned, and you can see in this picture, this is just as I'm starting to get 7-agent chemotherapy. And you can tell here I'm motivated, I'm ready for war, ready to take this thing on again. And then this picture was taken about 6 weeks later. And a lot happened during that period. Most importantly, I had a conversation with my doctor where I asked him, I said, "What causes this disease to attack the way it does? Which immune cell type is driving this? What's gone wrong inside that cell type?" And this is the world's expert for Castleman disease, and he said, "We don't know," to all of these questions. So I turned to my sisters and now wife, and I told them, I said, "I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life, however long that may be, to trying to cure this disease." So when I left the hospital, I started looking to see, well, what's being done for Castleman disease? And I found that the situation was really grim. There was no diagnostic criteria, no one collaborating. There were a few advocacy organizations, but they were not active in research. There was a lot of work to be done. So then I looked to see, well, how do other foundations accelerate research? And I found that a lot of groups begin by first raising money and then inviting researchers to apply to use the money how those researchers see fit. But I thought about some challenges and some problems that we might face with Castleman disease, a disease with so few researchers that we just have to hope that the right researcher applies for the right project at the right time. And when you have the disease, you don't want to just hope about all these things having to line up. So we decided to come up with a new approach, and we called the collaborative network approach. Basically, we started by first building a community of researchers and physicians around the world through online webinars and through online discussion board and in-person meetings. Once we built that community, we sent out a series of surveys to crowdsource from that community to figure out what research questions need to be done. Once we generated a really impressive response and a number of research study ideas, we prioritized them, and then we proactively went out around the world to find who is the best person in the world to do each one of our studies. So rather than hoping that the right person applies for the right project at the right time with the right skill set, we found out what the right project was, and then we went out to find the right person to do it. In parallel, and as we make these, as we generate findings, we always look to see what drugs already exist that might have an effect on this disease that we can use off-label, that are at the local CVS that could help someone tomorrow. And we have an international natural history study so we can track the effectiveness of all of these off-label treatments. One thing I'm really proud of about our work is that this is done with the work of medical students, business school students, patients, loved ones, people like Jason Ruth, who's here with me today, who's our Chief Scientific Officer, who they have so many other things they could work on, but they volunteer their time to help us to accelerate our research. Our most important breakthrough came a few years ago when we realized that the medical community's understanding for Castleman disease was upside down. When I was diagnosed, if you read a textbook, you would learn about lymph node tumors that then turned on the immune system. But the research we did, we found that it's actually not the lymph node tumors turning on the immune system, it's actually the activated immune system that causes the lymph nodes to grow. These are not tumors, this is reactive lymphadenopathy. And the reason this shift is so important is that before, when you think it's just tumors secreting IL-6 to turn on the immune system, you can only kill tumors with chemotherapy or block IL-6. But now that we think about it as an immune system disorder, there are a whole host of immunosuppressants that can then be tried against this disease. Now, though this is a big step for us in having the right framework, there's still a bunch of unknowns. What causes the immune system to become activated in the first place? What cell types are involved? Signaling pathways? There's a lot of work still to do. About 1 week after I submitted the paper to Blood, which resulted in the figure I just showed, all of my symptoms returned. So 17 months after my previous relapse, I had my 5th flare of this disease. At this stage, I had failed every drug that had ever been reported. I had failed the only experimental drug that's now approved. And relapse after relapse was taking a toll. And I was approaching my lifetime max of cytotoxic chemotherapy. So at that stage, I decided I would pour everything I had into going through the data that we had available to me. And looking through thousands of pages of medical records and every sample that was available, I started finding a few trends. The first is that I found out that soluble IL-2 receptor levels, which is a marker of T-cell activation, was the earliest protein to rise leading up to my flare. The next thing to rise after soluble IL-2 receptor was VEGF, the growth factor that causes blood vessels to grow. And you remember I told you about the cherry hemangiomas, these blood vessels growing in my skin, something that we had observed earlier on that was fitting with this story. At the same time, my lymph nodes are highly vascularized, lots of blood vessels. So we knew there were activated T cells, and we knew there was excess VEGF, and we thought, should we target T cells? Should we target VEGF? Or is there maybe something else that we could go after? So we looked upstream. And one signaling pathway that's upstream of both T cell activation and also VEGF expression is the Mtor pathway. Fortunately, the Mtor pathway also has a drug that blocks it very well. So we stained my lymph node for phospho-S6, which is a marker of Mtor activity, and brown is positive, and my lymph node is the second from the left. And you can see that my lymph node stained blazingly strongly positive for Mtor activity. So based on these data alone, and having failed every drug that had ever been used in Castleman disease and having nearly died 5 times battling the disease, I decided to try this drug, sirolimus, an Mtor inhibitor that had never been used in Castleman disease before, but that I had some data that I thought could mean that it would work. So I started myself on it, And fortunately, today marks 42 and a quarter months. Today is 42 and a quarter months since my last relapse. In my first 42 months, I had all 5 of my flares, all 5 hospitalizations, spent over 8 months hospitalized over that window. And now in the second 42 months since I got sick, I've been in remission this whole time. Now I say 42.25 months because when you've gone through what I've gone through, you don't round down and you don't round up. It's 42 and a quarter months that I've been in remission, and we're still counting, of course. We've also now started the drug on 3 other patients who are doing well. But before we can really expand this more broadly, we are looking to do a clinical trial. I actually just submitted an R01 to try to do a clinical trial for sirolimus in more Castleman disease patients. We've made a lot of progress since 2017. On the screen, I've superimposed where we were in 2012 and then where we are today. We've got a huge community of researchers working together from all over the world. 32-member scientific advisory board from 8 countries on 5 continents. We've got 11 studies that have been launched, another 2 that we're raising funds for. We've got our own diagnostic criteria that was just published a few months ago. We've got an ICD-10 code. Siltuximab, an IL-6 blocker, got approved back in 2014, which was a huge step for our community. Unfortunately, that drug only works for 1/3 of patients. So though it's huge for that third, there's 2/3 of us that are still struggling for additional options. As I shared before, we have a new disease model that's guiding our research. We've connected 6,000 patients and loved ones online and in person. We've built a large partnership between industry, advocacy, and academia, and now we're coordinating research all over the world. We're making incredible progress, but we certainly still have work ahead of us. I've talked a lot today about research, so I want to close by talking a little about patient engagement. So this is a Castleman. It was our unofficial logo for the first couple years of the CDCN. I got it off Google Image. But I showed this image to a bunch of our patients during a webinar that we held. They said, Dave, we like the Castleman, but we think he's kind of puny. So we got a new Castleman made. And so this is our new Castleman. And so I held another webinar. I showed it to our patients. They said, we love it. The only thing that could be different is maybe a flamethrower and a machine gun. That might make it a little bit more like the real Castleman that we've all battled. And then 2 weeks later, this showed up on our Facebook page. And so one of our patients had screenshotted it during the webinar, taken it to a tattoo artist and got a tattoo on his shoulder. And I always say, if this is not patient engagement, I don't know what patient engagement is. On a much, much more serious note, the forum on the right of the screen is Kim Driscoll's forum. Kim lives here in the Boston area, and she's a member of our board of directors. She's also the mother of Elise Driscoll. Elise is photographed on the left side of the screen. Elise passed away 3 years ago battling Castleman disease here in Boston, at arguably one of the best medical centers in the world. 7 months in the ICU, she battled this disease and unfortunately passed away. I show you this picture because I think about Elise every day. I think about all the patients just like Elise that are diagnosed every day. And I'm inspired by Kim, who's just within a few miles of us today, who, though she's lost her daughter to this disease, she's still fighting with everything she's got. She's still a part of our board. I also wanted to show you a picture of Katie. Katie's one of our youngest Castleman warriors. She's been battling the disease since before her second birthday. She's now on the same treatment that I'm on. She's one of those 3 patients that we've started it on, and she's improved since she's been on treatment. So we're really hopeful for Katie. This is another one of our youngest patients who's currently doing well, but unfortunately the episodic nature of this disease means that you can go from looking healthy like I do today to being in the intensive care unit. And this is just one more patient who's a good friend of mine, Gary, who's doing well today. But again, I'm continuously reminded when patients like him relapse just how fragile this disease is, but also how fragile and how important life is. So before I wrap up, I wanted to share a few lessons. The first is for the gentleman in the room. I hope that no one confuses you as a pregnant woman. But if they do, I hope that you can find some humor and positivity. Throughout everything in life, there are so many challenges that we all go through, and trying to find positivity in the midst of all those is so important. The second is to question the status quo. If we had stuck with the dogma that these lymph node tumors were turning on the immune system, I most certainly would have continued to get chemotherapy. I most certainly would have relapsed again, and I very likely may not be alive today. question the status quo. There's so many more opportunities in medicine if you do that. Third, I hope you guys will consider embracing the model that I share with you guys for funding research. Don't just raise money and wait for the right person to apply for the right project at the right time with the right skill set. Go out, figure out what is the right project that needs to be done right now by the right person, and get them involved and drive forward your research. I don't think I need to tell you guys this, but life is short. We're all in overtime. Make every second count. And then lastly, this kind of work takes an army. If it's not for people like Jason and so many others working together, we would have made 1/1000th of the progress that we have. So I hope all of you will join together, collaborate. That's what this meeting's all about. Work across the aisle, reach out to your partners, and I hope you guys will all support us in our fight against Castleman disease. And here on the screen, I'm just going to list a few ways that you guys can do that. One that's very important is spreading this collaborative network approach, which we wrote up about a year or so ago that describes the way we've done this. Thank you guys so much for your time.